Good morning, everyone. Okay, so we are continuing our series. Let me just move this forward a little bit. We're continuing our series in Proverbs. So we're going to be looking at Proverbs 19:11. Could you put the first slide up, please, Toby? Cheers. So Proverbs 19:11 says, "A person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense." A lot of the translations, instead of using the word patience, they talk about being slow to anger. So patience here is basically in that context. We're talking about being slow to anger, kind of controlling ourselves. Now, anger in itself is not sinful. In Ephesians 4:26, we're told, "In your anger, do not sin." So if anger was a sin by itself, that sentence wouldn't make any sense. It'd be like saying, while you're sinning, try to make sure you don't sin. So anger itself is not sinful, but we do need to be careful in terms of what anger might lead to. So in James 1:20, we're told, human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Now, there is a distinction between human anger and what we might call righteous anger. Okay, human anger is of the flesh, whereas righteous anger, we know that that's more of God, of the Spirit. In John 2:14-15, we're told about Jesus in the temple driving out the money changers, and this can be a example of righteous anger. So we're told, in the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. Now, this is one of the most notable things about this is that Jesus made a whip out of cords. It's tempting to think when we read this account that Jesus walked into the temple, lost his temper, and just exploded, just erupted on everybody. But from this, that's not what happened. His response was considered. It was measured. He took time to make a whip out of cords before he took action. When we feel anger, there is kind of a test that we can use to see if it's righteous anger or not. And generally that's to say, well, do I think that God is angry about this? Is God angry about this, or is it just that my pride's been hurt? Is that why I'm feeling angry? Or am I being inconvenienced in some way? And everyone has particular things that trigger them. A friend of mine, a while ago, lent me this Christian DVD, right? And he spoke very highly of it. And I started watching it, and I watched it for a few minutes, and I was getting a bit agitated. And I watched it for a few more minutes, and I was getting even more agitated. And then I got to a point, and I was so angry, I just switched it off. I thought, this is rubbish. And I couldn't work out why I was so angry about it. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, this is a guy who's standing there in front of a group of people, and he's completely misrepresenting the Bible. He's basically making stuff up. And he was saying that all of this stuff came to him through revelation, through revelation from angels. So he was making out like he had this special knowledge. And in doing that, he was then completely misleading the people in front of him. I didn't watch to the end. I imagine he was trying to sell a course or something, or trying to get people to send money in. I don't know. But that's why I was so angry, and I feel like that was righteous anger. Now, all of us are going to be angry at some point. It's just going to happen. And as I say, there are going to be things that trigger us personally. I consider myself a very calm person, right? I think I'm quite patient. I'm a trained counselor. I've trained other counselors. I've spoken to hundreds, if not thousands, of people in distressed states, and I've calmed them down, and I've tried to help them out. I think I'm quite calm, right? But I know there are things that trigger me. I'm quite an overprotective dad, and I'm quite unapologetic about that. So if someone's rude to my son, I'm going to get angry. I remember my son had lost one of his teeth, right? And he came home from school the day after, and he was really upset. And I can't use the kid's name in his class. Let's just say the kid's name is Bobby. And he said, Bobby wasn't very nice to me today. I was like, why? What happened? And he said, well, Bobby said I look funny without one of my teeth. And what I should have done is said, sometimes people say silly things. It's good just to ignore people. What I actually said was, Bobby looks funny with his teeth, right? Which wasn't the best example to set for my son. I realize that. But this is the thing, right? Anger is an emotion. It's a response, right? It's like laughter. Something just makes you laugh. You don't sit down and think, right, I'm going to laugh now. Same thing with anger. What that means is that when we feel angry, and we will, we need to control it. We can't control what makes us angry, but we can control the expression of it. And let's be honest, for most of us, our first reaction to anger is probably going to be of the flesh, right? It's not going to be of the spirit. That's why people say, if you're at work and someone sends you a rude email, don't respond immediately, right? Take a little bit of time. Go make some tea, go do something else. Otherwise, we're all going to end up getting fired for calling our managers an idiot. Right, so we need to learn how to be slow to anger. And I think a way to do this is to try to cultivate a mindset. And the way to do that is, so looking at it the other way, if you're always stressed, if you're always focusing on negative things, then if something comes up, you are going to react angrily because you're already up here. But if you take time to be grateful for the things in your life, if you pray when things get difficult, if you regularly and consciously remind yourself that God is in control, then when things do come, you're less likely to react angrily. Oh, sorry. Okay, I do keep knocking it. I don't know if it's... I imagine that's expensive. Sorry, guys. Thanks. Thanks. Glad you didn't get angry. Thanks for not getting angry. Good example there. So we're told a person's wisdom yields patience. And Seb spoke about wisdom last week. And there is a real strong correlation between godly wisdom and the ability to think before we react, right? To be slow to anger. And daily life is full of things and full of people that are going to test our patience. Most of them travel on London Underground, but that's a whole other story. But we know by our responses, right, whether we're walking in godly wisdom or not. There's this book called Rising Above the Storms of Life, right? It was by this lady named Mary Pitches. And I read it must have been 20 years ago, actually. In it, she talks about having what's known as a kingdom perspective. And that's what we need as Christians, right? We're not just living down here. We need to have a spiritual perspective on the things that happen. So we're not responding in the flesh. We're not being impatient. We're not getting angry easily. We give people the benefit of the doubt. Or even if we know that someone has wronged us, we forgive them rather than trying to get them back. And that comes through wisdom. One of the things we need to remember, that's really important to remember, is that we are sinners among sinners, right? We're not better than other people. We're not above the people who have wronged us. And we compare ourselves. You hear people doing this. We compare ourselves to other people. We say, well, at least I'm not a murderer, or at least I'm not a bank robber, or you point at someone at work and say, well, I'm not as bad as them. But that misses the point. Because we're not supposed to be comparing ourselves to other people. Because we're not supposed to be like other people. We're supposed to be like Jesus. So from that standpoint, yeah, we are that bad. But to be honest, so is everybody else. But that's not the point. The point is that our standing with God is not determined by what other people are doing. It doesn't matter. So the next part of the proverb is, it is to one's glory to overlook an offense. We want justice, right? We want to get even. And it makes sense that we want justice because we're made in the image of God, right? So maybe that explains this sense that we have of wanting justice. Justice means giving someone what they are due or getting back what you are owed. So if someone hurts you, justice means you get to hurt them back. You get to get even. But the big issue with that is that even doesn't exist. You can't get even. You never get to a point in any kind of argument or fight where the person that's got hit last says, okay, now we're even. No, because the last time you get hit, you're going to think it was harder than the last time you gave the last hit. That's just how it works. So there's no getting even. You see this with kids. I mean, you see this with adults, to be honest. You see this with everybody. It happens in relationships all the time, whether that's husbands and wives or parents and children or siblings. As long as hurts are not forgiven, and as long as instead you try to get even and they then try to get even with you, it's just a cycle. It continues and nobody's happy. The answer is forgiveness. And forgiveness is a theme. It pervades the entire gospel. And one of the most, I don't want to say famous, one of the most famous parables about forgiveness is the parable of the unmerciful servant. That's Matthew 18, 21 to 35. Toby, sorry, can you put the, thanks. So then Peter approached him and asked, Lord, how many times must I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? As many as 7 times? I tell you, not as many as 7, Jesus replied, but 70 times 7. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle accounts, one who owed 10,000 talents was brought before him. Since he did not have the money to pay it back, his master commanded that he, his wife, his children, and everything he had be sold to pay the debt. At this, the servant fell face down before him and said, "Be patient with me, and I will pay you everything." Then the master of that servant had compassion, released him, and forgave him the loan. That servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He grabbed him, started choking him, and said, "Pay what you owe." At this, his fellow servant fell down and began begging him, "Be patient with me, and I will pay you back." But he wasn't willing. Instead, he went and threw him into prison until he could pay what was owed. When the other servants saw what had taken place, they were deeply distressed and went and reported to their master everything that had happened. Then, after he had summoned him, his master said to him, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Shouldn't you also have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you?" And because he was angry, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he could pay everything that was owed. So also my heavenly Father will do to you unless every one of you forgives his brother or sister from your heart. It's a really powerful parable. Something to say here, just by way of explaining parts of it. So 10,000 talents, that's 6,000 denarii, right? And that works out to about 20 years' wages. So the first servant owes 20 years' wages, 6,000 denarii, and he's forgiven that. And the second servant owes 100 denarii, which is about 100 days' wages. So this tells us that the things that we have to forgive others are trivial in comparison with the goodness of God who forgives us. Now let me be very clear on this. 100 denarii, 100 days' wages is not nothing. No one is saying that the things that we have to forgive other people are nothing. The point, though, is that the things we have to forgive other people are not an equal comparison in terms of what God forgives us. And again, it's not about other people. It's about us. It's about us sinning against God. So there's a number of ways of looking at forgiveness. One kind of model looks at kind of 3 different aspects of forgiveness. So the first thing is that you acknowledge the hurt, right? You acknowledge, yeah, this thing happened to me. This person owes me something or has done something to me. Secondly, you then count the cost of what you're owed. So in this parable, the master knows exactly how much he's owed. The servant knows exactly how much he is owed. Now, this could be anything. This could be years of your life. If you're in a relationship and someone's been cheating on you for years, they owe you years. If someone has physically harmed you, if someone has broken your trust, if something happened to you in childhood, something could have happened to you when you were 5 years old. You could be 65 years old now, and for 60 years, this thing that happened could have affected every single day of your life. They've cost you something. They owe you something. Thirdly, you then make a decision to cancel that debt. So you know that they owe you. You know how much they owe you, but you say, you know what, you owe me this, you've cost me this, but I'm not going to collect. That's how we see forgiveness. And the reason we can do that, as Christians, the reason we can do that is that the debt essentially has been transferred to God. The punishment for what happened will either be on that person or it will be on Jesus on the cross on behalf of that person. Either way, it's not for us to try to punish or try to restore balance or justice. Our responsibility is to forgive and then trust God. Trust that God will make things right. In Romans 12:19, we're told, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord." And we sometimes look at forgiveness and we think it's weakness. We're weak that we're forgiving someone. We're overlooking an offense. It's weakness. But it's the opposite. Forgiving and overlooking an offense is a sign of spiritual strength, is a sign of spiritual maturity. We're wise enough and strong enough as Christians to let go and trust God with whatever it is that's happened. And there's a real strength in that. And quite frankly, forgiveness can't be weakness because Jesus forgives and God forgives. So it can't possibly be a sign of weakness. Also, we're told to forgive, right? In the Lord's Prayer, we literally pray this. We say, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." We can't come into God's presence with an unforgiving heart and expect to be forgiven. We have to forgive just as God forgives us. And forgiveness is an act of the will. It's difficult. It's an act of the will. It's not an emotion. It's not about feeling like we want to forgive. Right? You can be absolutely livid with someone and still forgive them. In Matthew 5:43-45, Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." So Jesus tells us to love our enemies. He doesn't say love the people who used to be your enemies, but who you've made up with now. Love your enemies. Love your current enemies. And love in this context, it's been described as desiring the best for that person, right? You don't have to like these people. You don't. But you do have to desire the best in them. And it's really powerful. It's interesting because so I've been preparing for this sermon for weeks, right? And a few days ago, something came up and really tested this because I was walking down the street and there was someone walking towards me that it doesn't like me. I don't particularly like them, but that's whatever. and we've had problems in the past and whatever. But they were walking towards me. And like normally, if this happens, they cross the road. They really don't like me. They cross the road. So they were walking towards me, and I thought, well, I'm going to say hello. I'm going to say hello. I don't care. I forgive. Fine. I'm going to say hello. So I said hello, and as they walked past me, they really dismissively just went, yeah, whatever. And they just kept walking. And I was really annoyed because I haven't done anything to this person, right? This person did something to me, and I forgave them. And so I'm like the bigger person. What's going on? So I thought, well, I've forgiven them. I was being nice to them, and I was, giving them this olive branch, and they kind of threw it back at me. So I was really annoyed. Anyway, I kept walking, and I started praying about it, right? Not angrily. I started praying about it, and something shifted. That's the only way I can describe it. I don't know how else to say this. Something shifted. I prayed for this person, and I did desire the best in them. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't, so there's something really powerful in that. And again, I still don't like them. You don't have to like the person. But I prayed for this person, and I did feel better. I felt lighter. It sounds like I'm away with the fairies on this, but I can't describe the difference. But there was a difference, and it was a big one. So, where am I? Okay, all right. So, in terms of what forgiveness looks like, right, Jesus gives us the supreme example of this. Because Jesus said, Father, forgive them, while he was on the cross. He was talking about forgiving the people that were torturing him to death while they were doing it. Now, we often think of forgiveness as this retrospective thing. That, the dust settles, everything finishes, and then we look back and we're in a position where we can forgive. But actually, how would our lives change if we forgave people during the hardship that they're inflicting on us? How would that change us if we had that attitude of forgiveness towards the person during the thing that they're doing to us? In 1 Peter 2:23, we're told about Jesus, when they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. Again, this is our example. We trust that it's in God's hands. We trust that he will make things right. Something that's really important to say is that forgiveness is not a reflection of the severity of what happened, right? I've worded that very carefully. Forgiveness is not a reflection of the severity of what happened. So just because we forgive, it doesn't mean the thing we're forgiving wasn't a big deal or isn't still important. A few weeks ago, I was talking about G. Walker, who's the mother of Anthony Walker, who was killed in a unprovoked racist attack. And she forgave her son's murderers. Something else she said, which I didn't mention, was she gave this analogy of a suitcase. And she says that losing someone you love is a weight to carry. You're already carrying this suitcase. Unforgiveness would be adding to that suitcase, adding anger and the need for revenge, adding unforgiveness, adding bitterness, adding all these things to that suitcase. And she said, you can't possibly carry that too. It's too heavy a weight to carry. And it's not a coincidence that G. Walker is a Christian, right? Because none of this can be done without God. We can only do this with God's grace. One of the misconceptions about forgiveness is that forgiveness means reconciliation. But it's not the same, right? It doesn't mean if you forgive someone that everything goes back to the way it was with them. Sometimes it can, but sometimes you need to let the person go. If you're in an abusive relationship, if you're in just a ridiculously unhealthy relationship, you can still forgive the person. But that doesn't mean things just continue and you allow yourself to get hurt over and over again. If you let a friend stay in your house because they need somewhere to stay and they steal from you, you can forgive them. But that doesn't mean you're going to be friends again, necessarily. And it definitely doesn't mean you're going to let them stay in your house again. It's not the same thing. It can be. Forgiveness can obviously lead to reconciliation. I want to be very clear with what I'm saying. But forgiveness is not automatic reconciliation. And some people might say that to you. They might say, well, if you've really forgiven me, things should... I don't know why they'd be talking in that voice. But some people might say that to you. If you've really forgiven me, we'd be friends again. We'd be friends again. Sorry. Yeah, could I have some water, please? Sorry, thanks, Tom. I was trying really hard to keep going without responding there, but I had to because I'm choking on my own lung. So, another thing is, how do I know? How do I know I've forgiven the person? And this is a good question because we've said it's not an emotion. You won't necessarily feel like you forgive the person. An inward sign of forgiveness is that you no longer dwell on it. You no longer obsess about it. It doesn't control you. You've chosen to let it go. As I've said, it's not about feeling like you've forgiven the person. It's a decision you make to move forward. And there is this idea that forgiving is forward giving. It's a little bit trite, but anyway, it does work. It's forward giving because basically it's not looking to the past. It's looking to the future. Thanks. Thanks, thank you. Oh, you made it warm as well? Yeah. Okay. Have you got a sandwich or anything? Is this it? This is it? What kind of service is this? Thanks. So, I realize I've got a drink here, by the way. I know you might be looking at me like I've already got a drink. But this is so hot. This is like lava. It's my wife's cup. So I put tea in it before I left the house like an hour ago, and it's still burning me. I realize nobody cares about this, but I just thought I'd explain why I'm drinking tepid water that Tony brought me. Right, I've got no idea where I was. Give me a sec. Forward giving. Ola was listening. Nobody else was. Thank you, Ola. Thank you. So, okay. So that is the idea, though, that forgiving allows us to move forward, right? We're not living in the past anymore. We can go this way now. Now, dwelling on things as well. Dwelling on things will lead to unforgiveness, right? When, as I said, I started preparing for this sermon weeks ago. And when I said to Seb, I'd be happy to do this sermon on forgiveness, I suddenly thought to myself, something's going to happen. Because when you preach, there's always spiritual warfare. There's always stuff that comes against you. And I immediately thought, oh man, something's going to happen. I'm going to have to forgive someone. Something big's going to happen. And I was genuinely worried about it. But that didn't happen. But what did happen was that as I was preparing this, I realized how many people have wronged me in some way, right? How much I've had to forgive in my life. And because I did the worst thing you could possibly do, which is to sit there and dwell on all the bad things that have happened, right? Because you get angry. It's going to agitate you. So this is the thing. We shouldn't dwell on things that we've forgiven. If we forgive them, that's it. We should, as much as possible, we should let them go. Not turn them over in our mind, not re-experience them all the time. If you want to dwell on forgiveness, you should dwell on how much you've been forgiven. Because trying to forget something doesn't work. That's not how our minds work. You can't make yourself forget something. What we need to do instead is fill our mind with other things. And in Philippians 4:8, we're told, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So we need to fill our minds with these good things. We need to fill our minds with God, with Jesus, with the mercy and the grace that we have been shown. And when we do that, there'll be no room to dwell on these negative things. Someone gave an example of unforgiveness. They said it's like being stung to death by a single bee. At any given time, you can swat the bee away, but you don't. You just let it continue to sting you until it kills you. Right? It doesn't need to happen. So why would you allow it to keep stinging you? And that's basically, forgiveness is basically swatting the bee away so that it can't hurt you anymore. Why wouldn't you just do that? Why wouldn't you just get rid of it? Why would you allow it to keep hurting? And some people think that by not forgiving, they're hurting the other person, or they're keeping control of the situation. But honestly, a lot of people won't even know that they've wronged you. Forgiving them is not going to affect them one way or the other. And not forgiving someone, it doesn't teach them a lesson. But forgiving someone heals us. It heals us. It helps us. Unforgiveness often keeps you connected to the other person, and that may well be the last thing you want. You don't want any connection with them anymore. And holding grudges, anger, it's exhausting. I find it exhausting. I find it exhausting. I don't have the energy to keep track of who I do and don't like. I'd rather just be friendly to everybody. It's tiring. It is an emotion. It will drain you. So forgiveness is difficult. It's very tough to do, especially if someone is wronging you repeatedly. They're doing things over and over again. Maybe a relative is an addict. Maybe they keep letting you down. Maybe they keep stealing from you. Maybe you keep trying to get them help and they keep throwing it back in your face. Through no fault of their own, I would say, but that's how it is. Now look at it from God's perspective. So we think forgiveness is difficult, especially if someone is wronging us repeatedly. Well, there are billions of people on this planet. Every day, billions of people sin. And some of them come and they ask God for forgiveness, but most of them don't. And God knows this, and he knew this, and Jesus still died for us. Think about the magnitude of Romans 5:8, right? Which says, but God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So when we consider forgiveness and how hard it is for us to do, it makes us appreciate even more what Jesus did for us. And we should be eternally grateful. I know that, we talk about the crucifixion all the time, and sometimes it just becomes another story. It just becomes another thing that we forget the horrors of it. I was watching something the other day, and it wasn't gory or anything. It showed the nails, the types of nails that probably would have been used to nail Jesus to the cross. And it just I don't know why this affected me. It just had nails on wood, on a plank of wood, just laying on a plank of wood. And I just had the image of those nails being driven through flesh and into that wood, and being pinned to the cross in that way. And seeing that metal, imagining those nails, it made it really vivid to me. So we've been forgiven by God himself, right? Of course, we should forgive. So I just want to end on another Bible verse. It's Colossians 3:13, which says, bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. Okay, I'm going to end there and hand back to Seb. Thanks. So I'm just going to get my things.
Thanks, Angelo. Friends, why don't we just take a minute just to sit with that and just invite the Lord to continue to speak to us and minister to us. And I'm aware of the fact that some of this will be painfully relevant to us right now. And so we're just going to ask the Lord to minister by his Spirit. And if that's you, I just want to